So our next interview with Kyra Whitten, Senior Vice President Sustainability and President at the Flex Foundation. Our subject, future-proofing your sustainability strategy and a rapidly shifting landscape. So please welcome Kyra to the stage today. Kyra, hi.
Hi, Neil. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome indeed. We have a lot to cover over the next 25 minutes, so we will push on with that. You've got plenty of experience for you to dig into, but let's lay a bit of groundwork for people. Before we get on with things, can you tell us a little bit more about Flex?
Sure, would be happy to. So Flex is a $26 billion global outsourced manufacturer. So we make products on behalf of our customers, everything from data centers, autonomous vehicles, to coffee makers and vacuums and everything that you can think of in your everyday life. We have about 170,000 employees across 100 manufacturing and service locations in 30 countries. So large global scale for us.
Absolutely. Well, the conversation is predicated on the shift that ESG is shifting. It's something that's constantly moving. Let's start by characterizing exactly what that shifting landscape is. It's a big part of our question today. From your point of view, as well, a truly diversified manufacturer, what are some of those key, I would say, macro trends that really are top of mind of sustainability leaders and practitioners at the moment?
I think a couple of things that we're seeing just increase in prevalence. One is reporting and the rigor around reporting in terms of how we manage data and how we disclose data across a myriad of frameworks. I would say the other thing we're seeing is just the demand from stakeholders that companies be more sustainable, whether that's investors, customers, employees, and that's continuing to be something that companies have to do. And I think the third is just how organizations are having to manage the complexity of sustainability, and it's evolving on where sustainability sits within organizations.
Because for you, as we talk about this shifting landscape, the speed of change, because there might be plenty of organizations that feel that, yep, we're on top of this, we know how we're reporting, we know what we're doing, we've got a policy, it's up on our website, we're on top of this. Is there a risk of people not really appreciating the acceleration of that change?
Absolutely. I think that in particular for public companies, the SEC has launched, new guidelines. We're seeing new guidelines out of Europe, and they are not always aligned. So it's easy to miss something. And most sustainability teams are still quite small. So I think that's an area where companies can miss. I think the environmental agenda is pretty established, but it's incredibly complex in what companies are required to do. And it's different whether you're a services company, software, or a product company. Those requirements are very different. And, the requirement to be net zero that we're seeing is quite complex. And you can miss things super easy, especially around that area.
Because one thing you picked up on there is reporting and the future of reporting. Yeah. Can we zero in on that a little bit? Where do you see that going? Where do you see the reporting landscape changing?
It's a great question. So what I would say is, in the past, sustainability reporting, it was first more of a marketing tool, and then obviously companies started reporting in a GRI framework. A lot of us did. What we're seeing now, though, is it's really becoming a legal, governance, and finance activity. So a lot of us have had our reports and our data assured, but now what we're seeing is requirements to have the data audited. So one of the trends we're seeing is sustainability reporting is moving into finance. It's looking more like a financial document, like a 10K, with the expected rigor of a 10K, especially for investors. So I think that's one area where we're seeing significant change in reporting. I would say the other thing is just the proliferation of frameworks. And it's overwhelming to try to do them all. And so I think one of the things companies have to do is evaluate which frameworks are most important to their stakeholders and pick and choose, because you can't do it all.
Because that was something I wanted to get onto next about those different frameworks. There are so many. It must be overwhelming for people who are really maybe in the early stages of this process and are still learning. For you, best advice, how can people really best position themselves to keep pace with all of those different frameworks?
I think there's a couple things you can do. There's a lot of external resources and a lot of white papers and groups that are producing information on that. I would say that looking through whether it's BSR and the Future of Reporting committees, Responsible Business Alliance is another, and even conferences like Sustainability Live, where you have the opportunity to hear from others' experience on how to navigate these challenges. I think that for companies who maybe can't afford, to have consultants come in, these are great inexpensive ways to help educate yourself on what's coming.
Because education is something a lot of our guests have brought up at different times through all aspects of sustainability. You mentioned net zero. If we can just loop back on that quickly. You're setting up my questions beautifully today. Thank you so much for that. For you, everyone is wanting net zero. We know we've got to get there by 2050. How should organisations really develop and refine their net zero strategies, in your opinion?
I think it's about starting small and where you are. And, scope 1, and scope 2, which is the emissions that you purchase and the emissions that, you're able to generate in a renewable fashion. I think that's a great place to start. And really work with your facilities organizations and your purchasing organizations and government relations to see what options are available to you in terms of incentives and support to have those areas get support. And I think your supply chain and requiring your supply chain to get on board with that to help you reach that is important, which segues into scope 3, which is your indirect emissions. And this is where we're all struggling. We're all struggling with scope 3. And some of it is very straightforward, like employee commuting and business travel, but others are incredibly complex. Around use of products sold, if you're a product company, being responsible for the emissions your products generate and how you dispose of those products. So I think scope 3 is the large hill for all of us to climb. And the only way we're going to get there is an ecosystem approach, because it takes into consideration that whole value chain.
I love that analogy of the hill that everyone's trying to climb, because sustainability is definitely a journey. And one thing I like to talk about with any individual or business that has taken a lot of steps on that journey already is looking for the blind spots that people might have discovered. So for you, what potential blind spots are there for companies when they're working on that transition to net zero?
I think that in addition to so a couple things. One is thinking about, like I said, that value chain. How do you engage your suppliers and work with them to have their own net zero and reporting capabilities? Because a lot of the suppliers haven't thought about that yet, or they're small or specialized and just don't have the resources to do that. So I think that can be a blind spot, not looking at your suppliers. And I think that in the case of a product company where you are, responsible for the downstream emissions of your product, I think that hasn't really connected the impact of that for a lot of product companies, because we're now required to be responsible for the disposal and the life cycle of our products. And so I think a lot of companies haven't figured out how to do that in a way that isn't going to be financially crippling. So I think those are two areas that, especially in the emissions reduction area, that are going to be the biggest challenge for all of us. And I think just beyond the greenhouse gas emission reduction requirements and net zero, one of the things that goes hand in hand with that is waste. And so you can't just look at emissions on a standalone. I think that companies have to look at a holistic environmental agenda.
Because how important for you is is people being honest with themselves at a corporate level, at a board level, however you want to play it, because obviously there's simple wins that people can do, but you think most of those have been done by now. Sometimes there's got to be some really difficult and challenging conversations had. How important is that honesty for you?
I think it's critical. And I think as sustainability leaders, this is one area where you have to develop thick skin, because one of the things we know in the culture and the profession of sustainability is the importance of accurate data and transparency. And that means talking about when you're not doing as well as you would like. And this is a very different mindset than, say, marketing or even some of the investor and customer conversations. And so it's very uncomfortable for a lot of companies, especially who are new to sustainability. And what it means is having to say, you know what, we're not where we need to be. And this is the data that shows that we're not making as much progress, or we're not making our commitments. And so educating your leaders on that's expected, and that you gain trust and credibility by being honest in where you are, is a huge change management. And so what I would say is start with your CFO and really educate your CFO on sustainability. I think a lot of executives just don't understand it. So I think your general counsel and your CFO are where you start, and partner with your operations leader, because they're the ones at the end of the day who have to develop the strategy and implement the net zero plans. So it's an education process, and it's the other thing that I would say is benchmark. Show your leaders what other leading companies are doing and how they're articulating the bad news along with the good, so that they can get comfortable with that concept.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point with the benchmarking, but also what you said just at the end there about getting people used to hearing bad news, because you've almost got to find the bad news before you can fix it, which is a little bit of a backwards way of doing things. Well, time is starting to run away with us. I do want to go back to Scope 3 that you were mentioning a moment ago. Nearly every sustainability-minded company is working hard to get involved in that. For you, solving Scope 3 continues to pick up steam. What tactics can organisations take to try and build and sustain that momentum?
There's a couple things that we've done that have been very successful. And one is helping our suppliers make greenhouse gas reduction targets based in climate science. So we've partnered with CDP. We've educated our preferred suppliers, helped them establish goals and report, and that's been wildly successful. So partnering with an organization like CDP to help scale that education of your suppliers has been something that's worked really, really well for us. I think in our case, because we're an outsourced manufacturer and we're making products on behalf for our customers, is helping our customers understand what they need to do on Scope 3 and how to look at us as their supplier. And we have a wide range of customers, everyone who have, that are already net zero, to customers who don't even have a sustainability strategy or goals yet. So I think, again, meeting your your value chain where they are and collaborating to solve it together, I think is critical. And the last thing that I would say is product lifecycle management. You're going to hear this more and more and more. It's not just about manufacturing the product. It's about how the materials come in, how you manufacture it, and what happens until it's recycled and end of life. And I think that this is going to continue to grow in importance, especially for product companies.
Yeah, absolutely, the whole life cycle. Social responsibility is something I wanted to touch on. You've mentioned, and it's been mentioned on plenty of occasions today, how it's the next frontier in the realm of sustainability reporting. It's what we've all got an eye on. How can organisations successfully mobilise for what's to come when it comes to the more social standpoint?
Mm. It's a great question, and this is an incredibly difficult area because of privacy, because of just the global differences in regulatory environments. And this is especially important for attracting and retaining talent because people want to make sure that companies are treating their people fairly and creating a safe and inclusive work environment. So it's hard, right? Because the data available is inconsistent and sometimes hard to get. So partnering with HR, partnering with your diversity, equity, and inclusion groups is critical to figure out what you can measure, and what programs you can do, because all of this costs money. And so you have to pick and choose where you're going to make that impact. What I will say, though, is because we've seen brands in the news because of labor practices, that sensitivity is going to go up and up. So organizations like the Responsible Business Alliance is a great place to start because they have frameworks and different certifications that you can use that will instill that confidence, especially with your customers, that you're doing the right thing from a labor perspective.
And we've talked a lot today about things like net zero. We've just spoken about social responsibility. We've talked about reporting. Mm-hmm. What I'd really like to find out a bit more about is how Flex's sustainability team has changed. Because from a lot of speakers today, people have said how it needs to be something that's ingrained into the entire business. It doesn't just need to be a little standalone thing or bolted onto another department just to report on their figures. For you, mm-hmm. how has that change within Flex, and how are the critical skills and specialities teams needed to remain effective, not just now, but in the future?
It's a great question. And I would say where we started was that small team that just collected data and reported. And how we've evolved is we've gone to what we call a program management office. So we still have a centralized team that's focused on, stakeholder management, communications, data collection, and reporting. But what the team is also responsible for is being that central hub that's created a cross-functional, what we call sustainability leadership team, so that all of the functional owners, whether that's EH&S, HR, legal, ethics and compliance, diversity, equity and inclusion, come together to review progress, understand the trends, and work through where we are in our progress. And so that's working for us. It's a job where it's massive influence, it's carrot and stick, and then we're responsible for reporting up to the CEO and the board of directors on a quarterly basis on where we are. So that's working for us. But what I would say is that, again, this has to be aligned to your own organization, whether you decentralize it or whether you centralize it. The biggest part of it is making sure you have clear who's responsible and who's accountable. In terms of skills, what I would say is you're seeing a lot more specialization. So you have reporting experts, you have data analyst experts. We actually have a lawyer on our team, and a former RBA auditor on our team that's an expert in labor. So what we've tried to do is specialize our resources in that central organization to be able to provide more value to the organization, and also try to focus some of our time on what's ahead to be more efficient to the functional owners so that they don't have to do that work.
And one thing that came up in the panel discussion just a moment ago was about the balance between short-term execution and long-term strategy, because the business has still got to run, the business has still got to function, mm-hmm. while still accepting there's change and progress needing to be made. For you, how on earth do you get that terribly difficult balance right between reaching those short-term targets whilst also being able to look 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years into the future?
Yeah. It's very challenging. And what we see is when you have those long-term goals, and a lot of us are, focused on 90 days at a time, right, for a quarter. And so what we try to do is, as the program management office, is be the ones that are looking ahead, because our functional owners aren't. And keeping that top of mind. Because at the end of the day, sustainability is about minimizing risk and protecting the reputation and competitiveness of the company, and making sure that we are making a positive contribution to the world, not taking away from it. And so just you've got to be disciplined in carving out that time to understand where things are going and clearly summarize and articulate that to your leadership team so that they understand that's what's coming. Because what we'll do is, we set our net zero goals to 2040 or 2050 or 2030. And if we're not making those incremental steps of progress, you're going to see everyone's going to plan for this hockey stick approach to try to cram all of it into those final years when you're due to hit that goal. And we all know that doesn't work. So that drumbeat and continuing to push for incremental progress is really important.
We are very nearly out of time, just a couple of minutes left, but I do want to get to a theme that's come up in a lot of questions today. We've had so many come in today, I can't thank you enough for them. And that is when sustainability teams have fingerprints across so many parts of a business, can it be difficult for them to know where their scope starts and stops? And for you, what advice would you give about how sustainability teams can navigate that problem?
It's incredibly challenging, and how we've approached it is, start with a RACI, who's responsible, who's accountable, who consults and who informs. I think that that's critical. And, establishing working relationships with each of the functional owners who are responsible for delivering on the sustainability strategy. And, we've really tried to use a carrot approach where, how can we help? What information do you need where they're falling behind? Hey, we have to report to the board of directors in 2 months, and this is off track. What can we do? And we've tried to take that approach, but it doesn't always work because of these short-term priorities. So having a way to finesse and protect the relationships and not look like the police department, so to speak, or the oversight, but also hold them accountable for delivering is really difficult. And so you have to have that mentality of taking ownership, even though there's no way for you to actually deliver on it. And it's a mindset, and you just have to work at those relationships and build trust. But again, hold them accountable, as difficult as that is. And so, I think that that's going to continue to be a challenge. And again, using benchmarking, using outside framework, using case studies or information you find at, conferences like Sustainability Live can help you show your internal partners what's going on and how this is showing up externally, to help connect the dots that it's not just about what you're doing, but the impact it's making. And I think those are some ways to try to manage through influence, which a lot of us have to do.
Okay, Kyra, that is fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground and plenty of useful advice for everyone to take away. Thank you.